Hello everyone. Welcome. Yeah, we're the last session. We're gonna have a good time. So first, I want to make sure I can remain professional here. Welcome to the Maple Leaf Mystery Conference presented by Writers First. We want to thank our sponsors, Crime Writers of Canada and Sisters in Crime, the Toronto chapter, for their support, as well as the many authors participating in this event. If you haven't had a chance, we invite you to visit the online bookstore to check out the terrific books offered by participating authors, and also to support the independent bookstores listed in our Indie Spotlight. We hope you enjoyed all the presentations that have happened so far, and take part in submitting questions. And we're especially happy that you've joined us for this last session. We have a lovely panel here and we're gonna have a really good discussion. So a little bit about me. Like Eric said, my name is Joanna Vandervloek. I'm a member of CWC and I write a thriller series. I have the Unraveling and Dealer's Child, and I'm a host and creator of the podcast JCB Art Studio, where I enjoy interviewing authors and artists. So now, today's panel. Okay, let's start. We have P.D. Workman. She is an award-winning and USA Today best-selling author. She writes riveting mystery, suspense, and young adult books dealing with mental illness, addiction, abuse, and other real-life issues. P.D. Workman started publishing in 2013. She has won several literary awards from Library Services for Youth in Custody for her young adult fiction. She currently has over 80 published titles and can be found at pdworkman.com. Okay, our next panelist, Charlotte Morganti. She writes mysteries, both novels and short stories, ranging from gritty investigations to humorous capers. She usually sets her stories in small towns that harbor both villains and the sleuths who pursue them. Her short stories have appeared in Black Cat Mystery Magazine, Black Cat Weekly, and several anthologies. Charlotte is also no stranger to the awards shortlist. Two pre-published novels were finalists for various awards, and recently her short story, All My Darlings, was shortlisted for a Crime Writers of Canada Award of Excellence. All right. Okay. Janice McDonald. She is the creator of the Randy Craig Mysteries, the first detective series that is set in Edmonton, Alberta. Like her fictional counterpart, she too spent a great portion of her working life as a university sessional lecturer. However, she now keeps the government of Alberta safe from dangling modifiers. Dave Butler. Dave is a professional forester and biologist living in Cranbrook, British Columbia, in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. Dave is the author of environmental mysteries and thrillers, including the Jenny Wilson Mystery Series, published by Dundurn Press. The first in that series won the Arthur Ellis Award for Best Crime Novel in 2018. Dave's writing and photography have appeared in numerous Canadian publications. He's a Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal winner and a Fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. When not writing, Dave is professionally involved in sustainable tourism at local, national, and international levels, and he travels extensively. He's a professional author, member of the Crime Writers of Canada, and he is represented by Sam Hyatt at the Wrights Factory. if you want to read some of Dave's writing articles, he's also a founding member, and he regularly posts at freerangewriters.com. Welcome, everyone. It's so good to do this. Okay, our discussion is going to be using location as a character, flavor, or plot element in our stories. Okay, so I'm just going to start. Charlotte, I'm going to start with you with my first question, and that is, do you feel that the setting of your novel or short story is a thumbprint or reflection of your own character?
Yes, to an extent. Certainly because I set most of my stories in small towns. I was brought up in a small town, am intimately familiar with how everybody there knows everything about you, and is always anxious to tell your mother everything that you've been doing. And that comes out in my stories. And I think also because I grew up in Alberta and then moved to British Columbia, my stories reflect the need of the love of Albertans for that blue sky and sunshine, and the stress that happens when you move to the coast and you're met with gray days.
Very good, very good. And how about you, PD Workman? Do you feel that the setting of your novels or short stories, it's a thumbprint or a reflection of you?
In some cases, probably. The series that I'll be talking about the most today is my Parks Pet Mysteries series, and that is set in Calgary, specifically in Calgary Parks. And you know, I love Calgary Parks and green spaces, and was involved in the build out of the Glenbow Ranch Provincial Park and that kind of thing. And I hike or run through some of the parks that appear in the series. Other series that I have, or most of them, are set in the US, but I noticed when going through them that they all tend to be small towns, green spaces, things like that. So that obviously has an influence on me in my other series as well.
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to go straight to you, Janice. How do you feel?
Well, setting my my books in Edmonton in Alberta, I normally wander around thinking I am the prototypical Albertan. You know, my mother was born in a log cabin in the Peace River country, and my father was a cowboy from south of Calgary, and I was born in Banff. You know, so I think of myself as the absolute typical Albertan until there's an election. And so I'm not sure. I guess maybe that's why I focus on the university aspects of, and more the, each book sort of deals with an element of the arts or history, historic sites, or the theater, or the music scene, or the visual arts scene of Edmonton. So probably trying to carve out an element that is not the first thing one thinks of when one thinks of Alberta.
Okay, okay. Dave, I'm very curious about your answer given your backdrop there.
Well, short answer for sure, like others, is yes. I mean, I love geography and I love maps. You know, being a lover of geography and a photographer, I always find that I'm really intrigued by places on the maps, and also what I always say is the spaces in between. So in my novels, I'm always looking for settings that I find enchanting, places that I've grown up with, like in the Okanagan where I grew up, or just places in the mountains, any of the kind of the western mountain ranges. They're always just so enchanting for me. So I always try and find, a lot of my stories actually take place in rural areas, I'm not a big city guy, so there's very few of my stories that are actually taking place in cities. Most of it's pretty wild country. I love to be able to describe, how the wind tastes and smells in the mountains and those kinds of things. And I love going places where there's no internet connections or cell phones. So those show up in my stories an awful lot.
Okay. All right. So let's go for another one. Another question here. We're going to mix some things up here. We will be having some short readings, but let's do another question. Okay. Do either of you use setting as foreshadowing? And I'm going to give an example where I had a chapter where I referenced my setting was Chinatown, and I referenced red dragons, red lanterns, and then a red electric guitar. Taking red, thinking of blood, and it ended up happening that a red electric guitar was a murder weapon. So I almost wanted to take the colors that I saw in Chinatown. So Dave, I'm not letting you off the hook yet. Have you used your setting as a form of foreshadowing of what's coming up?
Yeah, and I think the reading that I'll do later, I actually ask everybody to kind of watch for that, because I think I'm going to try and read a piece that actually answers this question. But in a general sense, yes, I love using the outdoors, and I think both the settings as well as in my cases the senses, the weather in these places, I think, in many cases storms in the mountains, kind of like the sky behind me, can actually seem more powerful and more dreadful than maybe something in a city. So I tend to try and use the settings, but also the weather and the environments that occur in those settings as much as I can to kind of set up that tension and that foreshadowing of something that might come ahead.
Okay, excellent. Janice, what do you think?
Probably nothing that self-conscious. It's not something I try and layer on deliberately.
Okay. I know with your novel, it was the letters that were left for the students in the university. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. PD Workman, how about you?
I probably do a little bit of the opposite, where I've got a beautiful setting, which is contrasted with what is going to happen and what you're going to find there. I guess it's similar to if you watch the TV series Bones, and starts out with people having a lovely walk in the wilderness, and you just know there's going to be a body there. They're going to fall on it, or it's going to fall out of the sky or something.
Okay. And Charlotte?
Not at all.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So I'm making sure of our time here. So I think let's have a couple of readings, okay? A couple of short readings. Charlotte, can we start with you, and can you tell us what you're reading?
Sure. I'm going to read a little excerpt from a short story called Squashed to Death, which is the first of a series of stories set in the fictional town of Blossom City, British Columbia. The narrator is Persimmon Worthing. She's a woman who knows almost everything about almost everyone in Blossom City. So if you want to find out how the story ends, it's free on my website, and I can post a link to it in the chat later on. Petal Choufleur died a violent death yesterday, based on evidence strewn near her body being chunks of green squash and a pink and white gingham ribbon. Sergeant Courgette speculated Petal was zonked on the head with a beribboned zucchini, and not your dainty serving for one zucchini either. That zucchini, Courgette said as he stood on my porch, would have fed a family of 6 for a week. I believed him because we're in the middle of zucchini season, and every gardener in town is scrambling to harvest those humble green squash before they become monsters. I told Courgette as much. "Ah," he said, "you grow zucchini, Madame Worthing." No doubt he was speculating he'd found his suspect. Everyone does, I said. This is Blossom City. It's what you do if you have a vegetable garden. Petal Choufleur outdid us all. Have you seen her garden? Courgette blew out a puff of air. Bushels of squash back there. Then he glanced at a spot near my door. Did you know you have a zucchini there with a ribbon tied around it? Sure enough, tucked next to my door was a mid-sized zouk, sporting a pink and white gingham ribbon and bow. I said, from Petal, of course. Last year's ribbon was green and white. The year before that, yellow with blue polka dots. Courgette stared at me blankly, so I went on. Yesterday, the 8th of August, was Sneak a Zucchini onto Your Neighbor's Porch Day, one of Petal's favorite days. Courgette said she put them on everyone's porch every year. When I nodded, he asked, and how did you feel about that? I shrugged. It's not a big deal to me at any rate. Oh, he said, but it was to others. I don't want to tell tales, but he was trying to solve a heinous crime, and it surely was my civic duty to assist. So I said, rumor has it, one person threatened to squash Petal's head if she ever put another zucchini on their doorstep. But it wasn't a real threat. It was just your normal Blossom City chit chat. And I'll end it there.
It's great. Oh, Janice McDonald, could we have a sampling of your latest?
Sure. I went looking for something that was completely setting. So this is from The Eye of the Beholder, which is the final book in the series of Randy Craig. And there's been a murder and an awful lot to do with a murder of a fine arts student who was in Mexico for Reading Week. And now they're back in Edmonton, and Randy's doing her best to help her new husband, Steve, who is a police officer. So she decides to do a walk around Edmonton to look at the public art, because that's a big thing of the art in Puerto Vallarta. I caught the bus downtown and started at the convention center, photographing and documenting every bit of art I could find. There was an Inukshuk past the convention center to the east, and a statue of Robbie Burns in front of the McDonald Hotel on 100th Street. A twisted set of what looked like huge vacuum cleaner hoses sat in the wee park by the ATB building. There were chrome birds flying across a wall of a parkade, visible through the park on the corner of 102nd Street. The inscribed benches between 100th and 101st Street told the story of Canada geese in the center of the city. Meanwhile, a running poem by Cadence Weapon, a former poet laureate of the city, appeared on banners hung from every lamppost from 100th to 109th Street, the length of Jasper Avenue that was considered downtown proper. An aluminum sculpture of straight and curved lines stood on the corner of 103rd Street. On 105th, in the Beaver Hills House Park, there was Lynn Malin's interactive statue of bicycle seats and wheels, which looked like fun, but I'd never caught people on it. More birds flew along a wall between that park, along with the name in Cree, and the Tiny Michael Fair Park, honoring Tiny Michael Fair, former city councillor. On 108th, they'd recently put up a tribute to David Thompson, the map maker and explorer, that looked like 3 aluminum canoes on their ends, joined in the middle with a sextant on top. There was engraving all over the canoe hulls with pictures, maps, segments from his diaries. Waiting to cross 109th Street, I recalled there used to be a wind statue with pipes that played according to the weather, but it had apparently moved somewhere else. On 112th, there was a bronze statue of a cow, or possibly a bull. I wasn't sure if that was city art or if it belonged to the restaurant beside it. Continuing down Jasper into the more residential end, there was a representational horse statue in front of a different restaurant and a more abstract metal horse nearby. I wasn't quite sure why the horses were such a theme, and there was no one to ask. I went a bit further, seeing corners painted to denote how the city was going to add in resting stops, but the art seemed to peter out before Jasper Avenue turned into arty 124th Street, aside from the mosaic on one of the older apartment buildings. So counting the birds further back, that made only 3 or 4 murals downtown. I knew there were a few more in Old Strathcona. Murals had started as somehow become a town concept in BC, in the prairie provinces, not the art of the metropolis. On the other hand, I'd heard that Winnipeg had something like 600 murals, part of the city's attempt to curb graffiti. So maybe the further east you headed, the more cosmopolitan murals were considered. I bussed back from 124th down Jasper, getting off at 109th. I had a vague notion of walking south to the high level bridge and then home along Saskatchewan Drive. But just as I made the turn south, my phone buzzed with a text message from Steve asking where I was and did I want to meet up for dinner somewhere. Relieved, because frankly, I had walked enough for one day, I texted back with the suggestion of the Common, a great restaurant that had the added cachet of being only 1 block from where I stood. He agreed to meet there within 15 minutes, so I walked into the cool interior and asked for a table for 2. When Steve arrived, he said, "Why were you doing this?" And I said, "Well, I was thinking about public art, a category which murals fall into, wondering how much public art Edmonton maintains. I know of other installations, but I thought I'd check out our main drags to see how we'd look to a visitor." And that's important. Why? Well, there are 2 threads that keep pulling at me about this case of yours: tourism and cryptic art. Did the murder happen in a tourist mecca? Does the murder layout have an art connection? With those postcards and art book in her bag, was it somehow part of the message the killer was sending? And if it was about sending a message, who was the recipient of the message supposed to be? Steve looked at me with admiration. That's a very good point. If you remove the possibility that the killer's toying with the police, trying to prove his or her cleverness, then there's a second audience. And if we could figure out who that audience is meant to be, that may offer us a clearer look at the killer. I tried to look appropriately clever, but Steve had taken those limber leaps all on his own. It made a great deal of sense, though. Find out who the message is meant for, and you're far likelier to find out who sent the message. Now, if we only knew what the message meant.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Okay. That's perfect. We'll go into a couple more questions. All right. So I believe setting and characters are connected. Did you set with your setting? I'll reword this. Did your setting influence character traits? An example being, I love the city of Victoria. It is a city though, there is some crime. So I have this habit of, when we live there, lock the doors. I'd go around the car, lock, 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 lock. I go and I stay in a small town for a little bit and I still have my habit, lock, 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 lock. And I swear people are looking at me like, what is this lady's problem? So PD Workman, let's start with you. Have you had your setting influence your heroines or heroes or your protagonists' character traits?
Sure. So Detective Pat in the Parks Pat series is definitely influenced by the setting. She lived in Winnipeg, but she used to visit family members in Calgary as a child, her grandparents and cousins. So there's a sense of coming home. She feels a connection with nature and the heritage of the parks. And when she returns there with her dog and her family, and she remembers going to the Stampede, Peter's Drive-In, McKay's Ice Cream, and places like that, which she then wants to share with her family. In other series, then in the Zachary Goldman Mysteries series, Zachary experienced serious trauma on Christmas Eve as a child, and he hates the picturesque winter scenes in Vermont that everyone else loves. It really bothers him. And in a couple of other series, Aaron Price and Reg Rollins are both transplants in the little towns that they're in. For Aaron, she's coming home to a place that she was happy as a child. And for Reg, then Florida's where she finds her tribe. It's a place where she belongs that's filled with mystery and magic. So they all do have certain interaction with their series, with their settings. Yeah.
Good, good. Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I think in short, because my main characters in particular spend so much time outside, they tend to spend more time thinking about dressing for the weather. So they're often showing up in more urban places dressed inappropriately for those kinds of situations, but certainly more for the weather. So I think that's kind of a fun one. I think I play with quite a bit in some of the stories. And the flip side of it is because of that, when they do get into some more urban settings, my Jenny Wilson, for example, she would much prefer to run into a grizzly bear on a trail than a biker in a back alley bar in downtown Vancouver. So I think I have a bit of fun with that in my stories as well.
Good, good. Janice?
One thing I noticed is that I made my character not drive. I mean, she knows how to drive, and she occasionally has to rent a car. But one of the things that people tend not to pay much attention to is Edmonton's a really walkable city, and it's got a very, very good bus route and this sort of thing. And I find that she can get more involved in the city by being on foot. So that was one of the things that I deliberately put into her sense of being.
Yeah. That was, again, one thing I liked about Victoria. I could walk everywhere. Yeah. Charlotte.
Well, I have a novel in the works where it's a fellow who is an Albertan who ends up in a small mountain town in BC. And so he goes through the whole claustrophobia sensation when he's stuck in the middle of the mountains, and how like the sun sets at 5 o'clock or something, where else in the rest of the country it doesn't set until 8 o'clock at night, just because the mountains are over your head the whole time. So in the short stories, however, I think I use setting more like it would be the situational setting rather than the view or the weather or anything. It's my short stories are all of the characters are small town residents, and I play around with that a lot, like the whole zucchini thing and how the characters just know what their neighbors are up to and notice things like why is that garbage can out there for 3 days in a row? Are they dead or what? Right? Of course they are. So that's my take on setting in any event.
Okay, so let's do one more question. With all of your novels, I was wondering, does your setting have a particular tradition? Well, Charlotte, I'm thinking of yours, a particular tradition, custom, event, landmark that you use, and why do you want to like highlight that tradition or that custom or the landmark? And Charlotte, let's just go straight back to you.
Are you thinking of the national days? Yeah, I stumbled on, and I'm sure the rest of you have, there's a national days calendar, and I'm telling you, there's a national day for just about anything, especially if you look at the American version. And so there really is a national sneak a zucchini onto your neighbor's porch day, which there is, and it's August the 8th, so beware. And so that inspired me to start thinking about all of the weird things that you could do, especially in a small town where you're looking for things that might draw tourists in. And in a recently published story, there is National Accordion Awareness Month. And so, in Blossom City, they have the month of June. It's all about accordions. And then there are other traditions, in a small town. I have gone to several of the small town parades that happen and they're not parades like you see at the Calgary Stampede, or Klondike Days in Edmonton, right? They're the little small town ones where people pull their kids in the Red Rover behind them or the Red Ryder. And so those are the traditions that I try to focus on.
Okay, good, good. Janice, any customs or events or landmarks that you use in your novels?
Well, especially in Hang Down Your Head, I put all of the festivals, the summer festivals, into that, culminating with the folk festival, because I really wanted a dead body on the hillside. But I hadn't realized this until a friend of mine pointed out that my character stops and drinks coffee all day long. And I think that came about because I would add in restaurants. I had this vague idea that somebody was going to, name a dessert after my character, or at least offer me a free dessert every now and then. But it rarely happens.
Yeah. I've done that. I've named cafes thinking, hey, got a coffee habit.
You
Okay,
would think, yeah.
all right. PD Workman, any particular events, landmarks?
Yeah, so as well as using the parks and the Parks Pat series, then I've used Canada Day and Calgary Stampede and some of the favorite Calgary hangouts like McKay's Ice Cream and Cochrane and Peter's Drive-In. In the Reg Rollins Psychic Investigator series, then the town that Reg lives in is modeled after the small town in Florida, which has the largest population of psychics in the country. I wanted to make that a place where she was normal instead of abnormal like she was everywhere else. And in the Auntie Clem's Bakery series, then I've used a number of local festivals and celebrations, cook-off, things like interests in genealogy and wild ginseng gatherers or sangers, as they're called. So I have tried to bring in a lot of the traditions of the settings.
Good, good. Okay, Dave, how about you? Any
Uh,
customs events? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to jump back to my geography theme again. I think for some reason, the Rocky Mountain Trench, which some are aware of, seems to be showing up in at least 2 of my first series, and it's showing up in some of the books that are now being pitched to some publishers. For those of you who don't know, it's a long trench that runs from basically down in southern Montana all the way to the Yukon. It's a low valley bordered on mountains of both sides, and it's dominated by wetlands and grasslands and small towns. And it just seems like it's just one of those things that, it can be seen from space, and it seems to be, for some reason, just in my psyche and showing up in many of my novels for some reason. I love the Rocky Mountain Trench.
That is cool. Okay. Okay, well, let's go to PD Workman and Dave. We'll have both of you read. Dave, do you want to start us off?
Sure, thank you. And I appreciate this. So I'm just going to read a real short piece. This is the beginning of my second novel in my Jenny Wilson series. The novel is No Place for Wolverines, and you might get a hint of what that means with this little piece just to get things started. Sue Ebb paused. The forest was silent around her, deep snow muffling all sound. The crisp morning air, so clean it could purify lungs in a single breath, smelled and tasted of wild places. A curious gray jay landed with a squawk on a branch above her. She looked at the bird, but couldn't shake this disconcerting feeling, like a subtle electric current humming at the back of her neck, that something was watching her. She scanned the trees, searching the dark places between the branches for movement. The blink of an eye, the flick of an ear. Is it tracking me? Will I see it if I keep walking? Or will it remain in the trees, studying me, waiting for another time? She pushed the questions from her mind, slipped her gloved hands into the straps of her ski poles, then shuffled higher into the forest, picking a safe route through the conical canopies, the voided tree wells, those deadly spaces between fallen snow and the trunks of trees that could swallow a person whole. The early snowpack, a blanket of unconsolidated powder, covered the uneven ground to a depth of almost 2 meters. Webb's snowshoes, wide and long, offered much needed flotation above the deep snow, but as a result, her inner thighs complained and her knees and hips protested with each repeated motion. Sweat dripped down her flushed cheeks. She understood why the coureurs de bois, the early fur traders known as the runners of the woods, walked with bow legs, even in the summer. Yes, she had volunteered for this, and yes, it had seemed like a good idea at the time. Despite that, she was now in agony. I'll leave it there.
And if I remember correctly, there is something she is carrying on her back, which is not that great, that nice. Okay.
Yes, yes, exactly right. Thanks for remembering that.
Okay.
We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Dee Dee Workman, how about you? Could you give us a reading?
Yeah, you bet. So I picked one from Immersed in the View. Try to get that on my camera there, which is book number 4 in the Parks Pat mystery series. Margie was puffing by the time she got to the park. She was getting into better shape. She could go farther than she'd been able to when she started, but she was still in pretty sad shape compared to what she'd been as a beat cop, getting plenty of exercise walking the streets. Sitting at a desk was not good for her, and she'd not been getting as much exercise as she thought she would once she arrived in Calgary. She'd promised herself that once she reached Valley View Park, she would give herself a break, walk around the pond, have a drink of water, take a few pictures, and get her breath back before returning home. The whole route was only about 3 kilometers, and once she was comfortable with that, she intended to increase the distance by adding a loop through the pathways by the Maxville Arena. Calgary had lots of green space and pathways. She might as well make use of them. Margie slowed to a walk. It was a clear morning, the sun shining brightly, and the greens of the trees and the blue of the pond looked like a painted picture. Despite the early hour, it was already 18 degrees Celsius. Actually, it hadn't gotten below 18 the night before. The last few days had had 36 to 38-degree highs, almost unheard of in Calgary. Most homes, the ones in Margie's neighborhood anyway, did not have central air conditioning. She'd been lucky enough to find a window AC unit a month before, when the first heat wave had hit at the beginning of June. It was never 30 above the first week in June, she was told. There'd been a few flakes of snow on Victoria Day just a week before that. Calgary didn't normally hit 30 until August. With the AC unit in Margie's bedroom, they could at least sleep. Christina had said at first that she would be fine in her own room. She didn't need to come sleep with Margie like a little kid who'd had a bad dream. But that didn't even last a full night. With the house heating up and holding on to the heat, Margie's bedroom and unfinished basement were the only tolerable spaces. Now it was already Canada Day, July 1st. Margie didn't have to go into work and Christina was out of school, so they'd stayed up a bit late the night before to watch a movie while they waited for the house to cool. But Margie had promised herself that she would still go for a run and knew that she would need to head out by 6 if she wanted to beat the heat. She was glad she had. She nodded and said good morning to an elderly man walking around the pond with a cane. She'd seen him there before, and she could see a couple with a pair of dogs approaching that she recognized as well. A lot of people wanted to get out and enjoy a bit of fresh air before it got too hot. Margie sipped her water, then put it back in the holder on her running belt and took out her phone for a few pictures. She walked by the little waterfall, bubbling happily away. Even just this little slice of nature, listening to the trickle of the water and the whistles of the red-winged blackbirds, helped to restore her peace and serenity after all of the recent news. Down below that, there was a marshy area with cattails and some scum and plant matter floating on top of the water. There was something in there. She'd seen a muskrat a couple of times in the pond and figured that was probably what it was. He was remarkably brave about all the people and dogs who walked around the pond. Most of the time he just ignored them, unless they got right to the edge of the water, and then he would dive, disappearing below the surface. But as she got closer, she could see whatever was in the water was much larger than that. It was obscured by the weeds, but it looked as though someone had dumped a dark blue suitcase into the water. A short distance away, she could see the bottom of a shoe floating on the surface of the pond, which confirmed to her that it must be luggage. Why would somebody throw that into the water? Margie left the pathway to get close to the water's edge, where she'd be able to see better. The closer she got, the more clearly she could see that it was not a suitcase and random assortment of clothing that had been dumped into the water. What she had initially taken for the fabric side of a suitcase was the broad back of a man in a denim shirt. The shoe she could see floating a few feet away was still on the foot of its owner.
That's good. As you're saying it, I'm thinking it's not luggage. It's not luggage.
It's not luggage. There's clothes, but it's not luggage. Yeah.
Okay. So next question. By using, oh, and I just wanted to say, I do see that there are questions there. We will do questions near the end of our session. Well, I will address the questions that are in the Q&A. Okay. So by using your setting, do you hope to educate your readers? You know, like you're writing this thrilling, this mystery, this intrigue. For example, I'm going to give a shout out to Marcel Dubé, and it was reading about canola fields and the smell, which I never thought of, the smell. So PD Workman, do you want to educate as well as entertain?
Oh, you bet, all the time. You know, that's one of my big things is just, you know, exposing people to things and teaching them things that they didn't know before. The majority of my readers are American, and so with the Parks Pat series, then I want to immerse them in Canadian culture and parks, give them a bit of armchair travel, and teach them about our culture and history, as well as the beauty of the parks and wilderness. I actually have had my editor come to me a few times and say things like, you know, do you want to explain what KD is for, you know, US readers? They're not going to understand that. I said, well, you know, I want some things in there that are unusual and novel for them. So other series that I have are less about the setting, but I still try to include a lot of information about their culture and history and particular things about the setting. Two of my series are set in Vermont, and Vermont has a lot of unique laws that have made it an interesting setting to use in the PI mysteries and medical thrillers that I write there. So that's caused some additional complications as well as been educational.
Okay. Charlotte, are you entertaining and educating?
I hope so. Not so much in the short stories though, because, you know, they're short, right? And so you just try to just deal more with what I hope is an entertaining story. But in the novels that I write, yeah, there is an educational aspect, I suppose. One of them is because I have a background in law, not the criminal type, which would have helped me a lot if I wanted to write mysteries. You'd think I would have spent some time in the courtroom, but no. But so my background is in more corporate finance and mining law. And so that helped with the first novel I wrote, which is set in the mountains, not far from where Dave sets his novels. And so there are aspects in that novel that are educational about prospecting and geology. And then there's another one where the setting is around Donner Lake, is down by Reno or Truckee. And I spent some time there a while ago, a couple of years ago, when my husband was down there on a conference, and discovered, you know, even though everybody knows like the Donner Party. And so I went to the to the memorial for the Donner Party, and, you know, like they get massive snowdrifts there. No wonder those poor people couldn't get out. So in the novel that I ended up writing, I've thrown in some, like it's all hooked to Donner Lake and the Donner Party.
Good. So. Good. Janice, the one I was reading, it's a university setting. Okay, so
Well, you know, they say write what you know, and what I was doing was working on a master's thesis on detective fiction when I first started writing my mystery series. And one of the, you know, when you immerse yourself in, you know, the ways in which detective fiction was created and moved itself along, one of the things you start to realize is that setting is one of the elements that a detective writer has to deal with. Because when you think about it, the actual plot of a mystery, everyone has read before. You know, if you're going to narrow it down to, you know, there is a puzzle, there is a body, there is puzzling characters and various suspects, and eventually a solution. So if you were going to be reading it for plot, you would be it would be problematic, you know. So what you were reading for when you move into a detective series, or you're reading for character and you're reading for location, and the more exotic the better, you know, because you want to be taken out of your own world. And in many ways, you really do want to be taken out of your own world, because you are about to be witnessing a murder and crime, and the elements of, you know, what Dorothy Sayers would say, the snake in the garden, you know, the idea of community at unrest. So what occurred to me was that any place can be exotic as long as people haven't been there. And it fell to being kind of a delicious joke to write Edmonton, Alberta as this exotic location, where it really, you know, people from Edmonton will come up to me and go, oh, you know, like, it's so strange, I've been on that street. And you go, yes, you have. But lots of readers from elsewhere will go, you know, I've had people write and say, we're coming to Edmonton because, you know, we've read all of your books, and you know, could we meet you at the High Level Diner, please? And I go, yeah, no, you are probably a strange person, but there is a sense in which the education element was, you know, back in grad school, somebody who was probably really irritated that I was reading Agatha Christie while they were reading Chaucer said, so I suppose you're going to write one now, are you? And I said, yeah, I suppose I am. And it was mostly to see if the paradigm and the recipe worked. And yeah, of course it does.
Okay, good. Dave?
Yeah, I think, and it's a great question. I think for me, because of the sort of land use and environmental piece, and a lot of those I focus on, and it goes to Charlotte's comment a second ago, I think I really discovered from crime writing and sort of mystery writing that these kinds of issues that we face as society, where you think about oil and gas pipelines, you think about hydroelectric dams, old growth logging, you know, even mining and other kinds of things, they always seem to set up this this division inside communities. And so that, I think, lends itself to some really interesting ranges of perspectives, and also obviously ranges of emotions. So if I'm doing any educating at all, I think it's about just letting people see that these issues, while on the surface might be kind of black or white, in most cases, there's many shades of gray in between. And so I'm actually able to bring in those different perspectives, those different shades of gray through different characters with different perspectives, and then lots of emotion. But ultimately, I think a lot of these issues, it's all about the emotion. You know, people are almost willing to do whatever it takes to win in these situations. And so from a crime and a mystery perspective, that just opens up a real treasure trove of potential ideas. So I think if there's any educating going on, it's that the complexity of these issues, that they're not as easy as they seem on the surface.
Yeah, and I find as an author, when I learn something, it's almost like I've heard the term Easter egg. It's like a little even Easter egg for the author too, when with your research, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So I'm keeping an eye on the time. I have to ask my favorite question, and then we'll go to some of the Q&A. All right. Taking this question, it's a favorite question from my podcast. So thinking of the setting of your novels, okay, Blossom City, a university in Edmonton, Ralph Klein Park, snowpack in the forest. Okay, starting with you, Charlotte. Your protagonist bumps into you. What would he or she tell you about the setting? Like it, hate it, wants the rain to stop?
Well, Persimmon would say that not everything in Blossom City is the way it appears, which is, sort of the theme of all of the stories. She'd also say she loves her small town, right? Which, I do. I love small towns. And even though I spent years and years and years living in big cities, I'm still at heart a small town person. The detective in the novel set in the mountains would tell me that he loves that small town now that he spent some time there. Didn't like it when he first got there, but could somebody please move the mountains?
You guys can hear me? Yeah, okay. That's sweet. That's so sweet.
Oh, well, thanks.
Yeah, I was just thinking about character development too, for your character who at first didn't want to be in the small town. I've been there. I'm like, get me back to the city. Okay, PD Workman, what would your character say to you about the setting they're in?
Well, you had mentioned Ralph Klein Park in particular in your question, and that's the one that features in Darkwater Under the Bridge. And Detective Pat loves the parks and loves nature, but she's scared to the death of water. And Ralph Klein Park is a wetland, and when you get there, then there's this big, dark pool. It looks bottomless. It's very dark, almost black in some lights, and there are 2 catwalks that go over it if you want to go to the learning center or go around the learning center on one side. Then these catwalks, you have to go above the water. There's a grill below you and that kind of thing, and that scares the pants off her. Just really scares her. So that builds some of the tension that you see later in the ending of that book.
Good. Janice, your character, one day is she going to say, I want to go to Harvard?
I think what she would tell you is that Edmonton is a really great place in the summer. It's the best kept secret is nobody leaves in the summertime. And that because we are so far from every other major city, that we have world-class entertainment and world-class art and world-class music, homegrown. So it's we're a cultural island here, and I think that's something that Randy Craig and I are very proud of.
Well, I could just imagine what Edmonton is like right now with the Stanley Cup playoffs. Yeah. Okay, Dave, what would your character, what would Jenny say?
Well, I think my answer will be quite short. If Jenny's out in the wilderness, wild places, and I ran into her somewhere, she would say nothing. She would just smile and nod, and we'd both understand why we were there, and there would be no need for words. We would just smell the smells and look at the vistas and listen to the wind, and there would be no words necessary. Short and sweet.
Okay, good. Okay, so Eric, what do you think? We should go on to some questions now? Okay.
I'm muted to be nice.
Okay.
Unfortunately, you probably don't have time for like one.
Okay. So by all means, cut me off, Eric. I won't be insulted. Okay, Wendy Tippin. I'm going to grab a question here, and one of you, please jump in. Would you collaborate with another author who sets their books in the same city/province as yours and have the main characters interact in something like a police investigation, similar to crossover TV episodes like NCIS and NCIS Hawaii?
No, I don't play well with others. That's why I'm a writer and not a playwright.
I would answer the
I
same
ha-
thing, quite frankly. I've got so many books in me still to come that I'm not sure I'd have time to stop and work with someone else.
I've done one multi-author series where there were, I think, 9 of us, and we each wrote one of the books in the series and had at least 2 of the other characters of the other authors in each of those books. So I've done that. And the Parks Pat series actually came out of a discussion that I was having with another author about doing a collaborative series where we had a set of characters and it took place in several locations across Canada. So that's where that idea originally came from. Even though the collaboration didn't work out, I still kind of went with the idea.
Okay, okay. And I have a question from Rose. And I know I wanted this yesterday too. I wanted to know what book, I think it was Melody Campbell was reading of Ian Rankin's. So Rose asks, please ask what books are the authors reading themselves? So when you did your readings, what were you, Janice, which book were you reading from? We can't hear you.
Sorry,
You're
this
muted.
is The Eye of the Beholder. This is the final Randy Craig mystery.
Okay, Dave?
Yeah, and I was, this is not going to show up, I think, but I was reading from No Place for Wolverines was mine. And I think if I got the question right too, when I'm actually writing mysteries, I can't actually read other authors' mysteries. So I end up reading a lot of nonfiction and other kinds of work. So I don't get caught in and sticking with other people's voices. So if that was the nature of the question too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. PD Workman, what?
Okay,
Yeah.
mine was Immersed in the View, which is book number 4 in the Parks Pat series.
Okay, okay. Charlotte?
Well, I
You did
think
short-
I'll answer the same as Dave did. It's in terms of reading while I write, I try not to read anybody who writes similarly to me, but the one author who I absolutely love is James Lee Burke, and his next book is sitting waiting for me.
Okay, okay. Okay, I'm going to try one more question and
No,
then
sorry, Joanna.
yeah, no.
Got to get you off on that one.
Okay,
I got,
okay. So
I got my back. Oh no, yes, please continue.
Okay, or should I do closing remarks, Eric?
No, you don't have to end everything right now, but as you probably know, you guys are the last show of the conference. So let me give you some time, Joanna, for some closing remarks for this, and then let me address the conference as a whole.
Okay, well, I'm going to do closing remarks, okay? Just because I'm looking at my time here. So Maple Leaf Mystery Team and I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, okay? Thank you to our fabulous panelists, Janice McDonald, Charlotte Morganti, Dave Butler, PD Workman. The sessions, they're all being recorded. And thank you again for supporting the Maple Leaf Mystery Conference. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I very much want to thank our audience. I know for sure Wendy and Rose have been here the whole time. I think they caught every show. Fairly certain. I thought Gloria had a lot of names. Judy was at quite a lot, and Jane. There's probably more, and I'm sorry. They were here more than I was. So thank you very much to our audience. I know there's some people backstage, and they really should tip the hat to them. It's just a question of will they come forward? Maybe not.
And Eric, I want to quickly thank you as well.
So Gavin and Alex have been working behind the scenes. Gavin's been doing our tech support, and Alex is doing all our emails, and we've been working on very, very hard.
Thank you.
Thanks for the shout out. Great panel.
Mike
by the
Martin.
way. It was
Thanks
awesome.
for all your hard work. Yeah.
Yes, and Mike Martin was behind the scenes, and Michael Kent doing a lot of work. They're just not here right now.
And Peyton, who was doing all of our social media that we had throughout the conference as well.
Yes, she couldn't make it for this one, but yeah, I mean, it's been very fun. So many interesting authors, and that I have to do the tech support, but it's a nice little like fun little benefit. I just get to hear all the different events the whole time, which is great. So it's been a
Yes,
really
our-
great event.
Our reading lists are huge now, so